Welcome back to my channel for tips and tricks for the brand new Sony Alpha 7R Mark VI, as I promised in my introductory video, which I will link down below in the info box so you can look this up. And in this video now, I will give you a bunch of tips and tricks, settings, customizations, which I personally found essential when playing with the camera and finding a setup that works for me. Let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, support my work. Many thanks for that. All right, I'm not in my photo studio. You see it. I'm actually in Greece, currently enjoy family vacation, but YouTube never sleeps. So you also need to produce content while you're on holidays. And that's what I want to do in this video. So I will try to make this video not overly long and pack only the really essential tips and tricks into this video. But there will very likely be follow-up videos where I might provide you with more content about how to operationalize, how to shoot, how to customize this beautiful new Sony camera. And hopefully you will enjoy that content and it will help you to set up the camera once you have it in your hands. A lot of things and settings I'm going to show you will actually also apply to other Sony Alpha cameras. So whatever I'm going to present here will be only in a few cases exceptional, only for this particular Alpha camera, and will highly likely also work for a Sony a7R Mark V or a Sony Alpha 1 Mark II, although there are a few specifica for this camera only. All right, let's go right into it. And my first tip actually is about closing the shutter automatically when the camera is switched off. That's kind of the first setting I typically set up when I get a new Sony Alpha camera. Why is it essential? Well, because if you frequently change lenses, there's always the danger that dust, dirt, something hits the sensor, and if the shutter is closed, that cannot happen. Although, be warned, never touch the curtain of a mechanical shutter, because that's a highly sensitive, highly sensible little mechanical element in digital cameras, and you should never get your finger on the curtain of a mechanical shutter. So let's see how to do this. The way these Sony Alpha menus work is very consistent across models, although there are tiny little nuances and differences from model to model. And what we do to set up that the curtain closes automatically when switching the camera off, we go into menu. And then these menus work here with main sections. You see we have here my menu, then main. We have shooting, we have exposure color, focus, we have playback, we have network. You always have to watch here what happens and changes. And then we have setup. And in setup, if we go to the very bottom of the two-page list here, we see setup option. And then if we go here to the anti-dust function, you see here two functions. You can activate the sensor cleaning and you can activate shutter when power off, which basically means the curtains of the mechanical shutter close and cover the sensor the moment in time you switch the camera off. Let's first deactivate it. Let me show you. Let's go here to off. And now let's get the lens unmounted on the camera body here. Let me do this here. So we take the lens off. And now if I switch the camera off, watch what happens. Nothing happens, no curtain closes, and basically nothing we observe here. Let's mount the lens back. Let's go back and switch the camera on. Let's go back into the menu and let's activate that function. And then let's see what happens. We're here under anti-dust. The camera remembers where we actually dropped off. Then we go here to on. And it warns you here, which is a serious warning. Take it serious, what I said before. Never touch the curtain of the mechanical shutter with your fingers and never get something stuck close to the sensor so the mechanics could get damaged. Be very careful here. But we confirm this because we know what we are doing. And now let's hot unmount the lens again. Let's get this off here. And let me switch off the camera and watch what happens now. Now it closed, you see? And that's the curtain. That's the part which you should never touch with your finger, never get close. It's highly sensitive, highly sensible, but you see the sensor is now covered. And in this way, I have an automatic dust protection, which I recommend if you switch lenses frequently, like I do and currently do here in Greece, because I have 4 different lenses in my backpack. By the way, you saw that the camera gave me a decent amount of time before it finally closed the shutter. So long that I even quickly checked whether it's really doing what I hoped I set up here in the menu. And that is intentional by Sony. They really want to give you time before the curtain closes to remove anything that might be close to the sensor so the curtain never gets damaged, because then you have to send it to the Sony repair center. My next tip is also about protection, but not protecting the sensor from dust, but protecting your content. And for this, we go back into the main sections of the menu. So we go here to the very left-hand side and go up to the shooting menu. And in the shooting menu, if we scroll down here, we find here under file, the copyright info. And that is essential in my opinion. I always do this under my first 10 settings when I get a new camera. And first of all, I've activated here write copyright info. You can switch this on or off. I've set up with the soft keyboard my name. That's the photographer's name, which is Math Photographer. And I've also set up the copyright holder, which is again me. By the way, if I want to change this, I can just press OK, and then I get a really tedious way of typing in that information. But at the very end, all that counts is that it works. Let's go here to OK. And in this way, I have this here. And if I want to see what I set up here, I go to display copyright info, and then it shows me what I set up under photographer's name and copyright holder name. And by the way, you can also get the serial number stored in the file. And you do this here. Write serial number is switched on, and that identifies that the image people are looking at and exploring via metadata has been shot by this particular camera. That's, in my opinion, also essential to activate here. And then if you want to go one step further, you can upload IPTC information, which will create an additional layer of protection of your content. You own the content, you have produced it, it's under your name. Make sure you classify and mark your territory in the metadata. For tip number 3, let's go back here again down to the setup, and let's go here to the menu entry. You already know the setup options. And I showed you in my introductory video that some of these back buttons here actually can be illuminated, pressing this button here at the top with the light bulb symbol. And you can actually customize here illumination settings. If you look here, you can, for instance, steer the illumination brightness. You can go to high, you can go to medium, to low, depending on the level of available light you have. It's very meaningful to have this. And you can also say here the illumination is always on. And if you have seen my introductory video, you saw that it illuminates the backlight buttons and also brightens up the LCD a little bit, but only for a few seconds. If you want this to stay on and to be there all the time, then you can go here to always on. You can also say always off. This will save a little bit of power, but these LED lights, they do not consume a lot of power. And I have here a timeout. And that's the way this is currently set up. Staying in the setup for a moment here, we can go down here to display serial number. If you ever need to hand over your serial number to Sony service, here's the way to most conveniently see it. You just press here and then you get the serial number of my particular camera. I should probably blur it out, but I don't care that much. So let's go to OK. And that's the easiest way to look for the serial number. As long as you have battery power, just go to display serial number and make it visible. And sometimes you need this for Sony service. The next tip I want to provide is charging the camera via USB-C. I mentioned in my introductory video that I typically charge the battery in camera and only charge the 2 spare batteries, which I ordered are not yet available from the Sony Center in Zurich, via the double battery docking station I showed in my intro video to this new camera. And if you really want to charge the camera via the USB port, which is here on the side, by the way, I don't want to move the camera a lot, but you see here the compartment door on the left-hand side, then you need to go into this menu and go to USB power supply. And you can leave this to the camera, go to auto. But you can also say here this is off, and you can also customize which of the two USB-C ports which I showed in the intro video actually is set up for power supply via USB-C. And in the auto mode, that's what I have set up here. The camera recognizes if a charger is connected to the camera and then uses automatically either port 1 or port 2, depending on which port is connected, for charging the battery in camera, which is very useful. And by the way, you also see here the data points I provided in the intro video. Port 1 is the high-speed port, 10 gigabit per second. Port 2 is the port which I use mainly for charging, 480 megabit per second. By the way, here is, as a side remark, a word of warning. I recommend to never have this on off, because a typical situation is the battery is depleted, you have no more power available, you have no external charger available, no docking station, like I showed it in my intro video on this new camera, and now you want to use USB-C. But unfortunately, before the camera died, running out of power, you switched USB power supply off. What are you going to do? You get my point? So never have this on off. It's really nothing bad in having this on auto or port 1 and port 2. I would choose port 2 because that's the lower speed port. And I think auto is the best option here. So you can always wake up your camera and let it resurrect if a battery is completely dead. Let's now talk a bit about customization. And if we go here to the very top of these main sections, we have here the main menu setting. And you see, you can here add items, and once you have them added, you can sort them, delete items, delete a whole page. You can set up various pages here. And that's kind of the analog to what Leica used to have in their favorites page in older Leica SL firmware versions. They removed that because they completely revamped the menu structure, but here it's still there. That's why it is called My Menu Setting. Most essential settings you want to have at your disposal, you can basically grab from all these various menu pages here with menus, sub-menus, sub-entries, and organize them here. And this is very useful if you want to make the camera your own. So let's show illustratively how this works. Let's go to Add Item. You find here the same main sections as you have them in your typical setup in the menu. And let's say we want to have here, for instance, image quality settings. Let's grab it. Let's say here, add this to my menu, and then it's added. And now if I go back here, press the menu button again, you will find under my menu image quality settings here. And you see this is currently set up for 66 megapixels, so the highest resolution available on this camera. And let's add another one. Let's go here to my menu setting. Let's add another item. Let's say we also want to have here the aspect ratio. Let's add it. And let's go back into the menu. And then you see here we have now two settings here added. Now I can also shuffle them. I can sort them differently. There are different ways I can organize myself. Always when you change the structure of my menu, go to my menu settings. And let's say we remove the aspect ratio again. Let's go here. Then we go to the aspect ratio. We confirm that we want to delete this item, and then it will be gone. Simple like that. You see, if I go back here, now I have only one setting here. And in this way, you can set up 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages of menu items essential for you for still images, for video, for general settings in the camera. And you have a bunch of options what you can choose here. Let's just go here to add item again. And you see what you all can choose here. There is a lot. For instance, if you regularly format your cards, you can take this one here, add it. And then if we go back into the menu, my menu, we have format here on that page. Let's say I want to have in my menu 1 all things that concern my image quality, the way files are set up, but I don't want to have format there because that's a general administrative act here. I can move this to a second page to my menu 2. Let's select it. Let's go here. Let's move it into my menu 2. Add to this location. And then we are here. You see this is now under my menu 2. So if I quit the setup section, I have my menu 1 with image quality settings, and I have my menu 2 with format. And in this way, split these two settings out here to 2 different menus. And all in, I think that's a very convenient feature. It will take you some time to actually set this up, which is suitable for your workflow. The next setting I want to show here is basically the main screen. And if you go into that, that is kind of what you know from the Q button in Fuji cameras, or what you know from the control screen in Leica SL3 cameras, although this screen here cannot be customized. And settings, which are by the nature of my setup, are not available. Like for instance, I'm currently in aperture priority here. And you see this here, for instance, I'm in the shooting mode aperture priority. So I can steer my aperture, but I cannot steer the shutter speed. Then the shutter speed is grayed out. And this is an essential overview of your setup. It's defined by Sony. As far as I know, there is no way to customize it, but it's really collecting the most meaningful, most essential information into one control screen, where you see all the settings you can tweak and the ones which you cannot tweak, like in aperture priority, the shutter speed. And let's make an example. Let's go, for instance, here to the drive mode. And if I now press here, I can actually go here and choose a different drive mode if I want. And in this way have easy access to all the essential settings, or I should say the settings which Sony considers essential for your workflow. By the way, if you're in video mode, you get two main screens here. Let me switch here to video mode. I do this on this control dial. And then if you go into the menu, you have main 1 and main 2. You see, this is main 1. And let's go back here. And this is main 2. And this is because in video shooting, you might have a bit more complexity in your settings. And this is also dictated by Sony. You cannot change it. But I personally think it's meaningful if I switch back into still image mode here by the control wheel on the top side of the camera and go back into the menu. You see there's only one main. It's also not numbered. It doesn't say main 1 because there is only one. It's just main, whereas in video shooting mode you have main 1 and main 2. My next tip is about the FN button. And the FN button is a feature which is on Sony Alpha cameras for many, many years. And if you press it, there are, by the way, different FN screens here for still images, and for video shooting mode I show you the one for still images. Then you have actually here access to functions which you now think, not what Sony thinks, but which you think are essential for you. So for instance, I have here the focus area. If I press that, I can control and change my focus area. And this is a very good button. I use this button many, many times during a shooting to quickly change settings. And this control screen here, you can customize. This is your way to get your most essential settings into a matrix of 6x2 soft buttons here, which if you have touch functionality activated, you can also activate by just touching the respective soft button. And the way to customize this is to go back here into the setup section. And then in the setup section, you have operation customize. And here you have the FN menu settings. And you see here, this is for shooting as well as for playback. And if we go into here, you see a distinction between still image function menu and video shooting function menu. And now we can customize this. And if I now choose any arbitrary function here, let's say this one here for drive mode, I can actually say, I'd rather prefer here to have a self-timer, pre-capture, interval shooting, what have you. Let's choose interval shooting. And then you see the icon changed. And now it's an interval shooting symbol, which is here. And if I go into the FN button now, you see here interval shooting is currently deactivated. If I go into it, I can activate it. And in this way, shoot many, many frames in a sequence of shots. That's the way it works. Let's go back and let's go here into the FN menu settings. And let's go back into drive mode. This is what I want to have here. And now you see, if I press the FN button, I'm back here into drive mode and can choose what I want here, including a self-timer, including continuous shooting, depending on how many frames per second I want, and so on and so on. So it's very essential that you spend some thought how you want to customize the FN menu, because this is your personal choice of quick access functions you use very often in your individual shooting workflow. The next tip remains in the same section and is about the customization of buttons and of the dial. And you see here, for instance, C3, C1. You don't see at the top side C2, and the letter capital C suggests that these buttons are customizable. But there is more to customize. And in order to see it, we first have to understand that you can choose different button and dial customizations for still images and for videography. I do it here for still images. And if you go in that, you see actually here in a graphical representation which buttons can be customized. And that is, in my opinion, very useful. So you see even here that you have function 2, 3, 4, and 5 on the 4-directional control wheel here. And of course, you can customize in this way a lot of buttons if you look here. You also see here a representation of the top side, what can be customized, and on the lens, of course, and also on dials and wheels. And this all follows the same principle. Unfortunately, the Sony menus have a lot of sub-menus, and that can become pretty complex. That's why sometimes in comments I read that some shooters prefer, for instance, a Leica SL3 or Q3 if they want to go for a compact full-frame sensor camera, because everything is so much more light in terms of complexity. And I want to make you a couple of examples. Let's say I choose here rear 1, and then I see what's currently set up on the buttons. So the first one is this one here. And this is engraved as auto exposure lock. And I recommend to leave it that way. Of course, you can choose any other function here. You see here, I get a whole bunch of options I can scroll through. But in my opinion, it doesn't make a lot of sense if a button already has an engraving and is a function you use to change that assignment of a function to that button. The next one is the autofocus on button. This is essential for back button focus, which a lot of pro shooters actually prefer to have. And also here I recommend not to change it, but if you never use back button focus, you can give it, of course, a different meaning. For instance, focus area or switch focus area, what have you. My recommendation is to leave it as is, because if you are not familiar with back button focus, do yourself a favor and learn it, because this will make your shooting experience much smoother. The next one is white balance on C1. That is a function which is not relevant for me where I don't need quick access, because I typically have my cameras in auto white balance. And if I don't like the color temperature, what have you, I change it later in post-processing. So this is a function I really want to change. And let's see what we have here. We can scroll through again main sections here. You see we have here a lot of main sections. This is about focus, this is about exposure, this is about remote shooting and wireless functions. And then we have also the setup symbol here, which you have seen before in my tutorial here. So let's say we want to have here under media, for instance, or file, create a new folder, right? So we go here, create a new folder. And if I want to separate a different series of shots from the next series of shots in my shooting, then I have here now create new folder on button C1. And if I go here back into the live view and I press this, I can create now a new folder, and in this way say, okay, the first 2 hours were my photo shooting with Stephanie. Now I'm in Zurich downtown and want to go for street, and then I can create that new folder, which I'm not going to do here right now. But you get the principle how it works, right? So let's go back into this one here. Let's go back to rear, and let's see what function I want to have here. I think this is a good quick access for drive mode, for instance. Let's choose this one here. And now if I press C1, I can here choose my drive mode. Now I will more carefully think this through in the next weeks when I'm 100% familiar with the camera, because I've also the drive mode here in the FN menu. And I don't like to have basically double assignments into the soft menu, which I have quick access to here via the FN button and on a customizable function button. That is something which creates redundance, and I don't like that. So I will need the next weeks. I have this camera only for a short amount of time, a few days, to see how I separate functions I want to access via a button and functions which I want to access via the quick menu here under the FN button. But I think you get the principle how it works, right? Let's go back here into this. You also have here the 4-directional control button or wheel here, and you see how this is set up. And you see here there is, for instance, nothing set up for the center button push. Here we have drive mode, and that's also indicated by an engraving. Here we have ISO quick access, and the one at the bottom is also not set. So here I have spare functions which I can assign to these different pushes of buttons and control wheels. And also here I recommend, if this is already engraved as ISO, leave it that way. If you're on live view and you push ISO, you have easy access to your ISO settings. Why should you give, because ISO is something you will access very often, why should you give a different function to this push here if you need to access ISO anyway frequently and have it already engraved here? It's much easier to remember, right, what this assignment of function to a customizable button is doing for you. Let's go back into that menu here. And then you see here, we also have here the top buttons, which we can customize. And you see, you can even give a different meaning to this tiny little button here at the top, which has the light bulb engraved, which I showed you in my intro video about this camera, and which kicks off the illumination of the buttons and makes the display a tiny little bit brighter, as I showed you in my live demonstration. And how you can also, as I showed you before in the menu, how you can turn this on at all times, always, or how you can have a timer where it switches off, or how you can completely deactivate it. So there are a lot of options here. And as I said, for me, it sometimes takes weeks before I finally come up with a final setup. If you guys are interested to see in, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 weeks, how I finally set up the camera with all the functions I need for my personal workflow, drop me a comment. I'm very happy to show you my final setup. For the time being, I'm not fully decisive what I do with all these customizations. I just have set up the most essential functions which I use for testing this camera with different lenses. What I should mention here, it's not only about buttons or the push of the 4-directional control wheel here. It's also really about control wheels. And if we go here, for instance, into this setting here, you see the different dials and wheels you have where you control typically your exposure or other settings. You can also customize them, how they react in different shooting modes. For instance, for aperture priority, you will very likely need a control wheel to steer your aperture if you cannot do it on the lens. I've currently here a macro lens, 50mm FE Sony 2.8 mounted. And there is no aperture dial on the lens, so I will need to control it via a control wheel. And then I can set up here how this works. Or if you are in fully manual mode, you might want to customize which of the control wheels here. There is a front control wheel, there is 2 rear control wheels. There is one you can block here with a button in the center. And which of these wheels you want to use for setting up your shutter speed and your aperture. So this is also something which needs a carefully thought through approach. But then once you have it, once you start shooting with the same settings all the time, the camera will be your own and you will become very quick in whatever your workflow is in photography and your shooting situations. The next tip is about display representations. And a display representation is an image overlay. And I've intentionally the lens cap on here so we have a black background, so we don't really see what's in front of the camera. And you see this is well populated with information here. There is the aperture, there is auto ISO, there is exposure compensation, autofocus single, there is copyright information that I have set it up, there is the flight mode, and so on and so on. There is a lot of information which can be very distracting if you want to focus on image composition and not get flooded all the time with information you might not even need for this particular shooting situation. So you can toggle between different display representations, and this is conveniently set up from scratch here at the display button here, and that's the top part of the 4-directional control wheel here. It's also engraved DISP for display, and if I push it, I get to the next overlay. Here is the next overlay now with histogram and with level gauge. Here is an overlay which shows me no live view at all, but only shooting information, and then I'm back in the original setup. And you can now customize this in a very simple way, and for this we go into, again, the operation customize menu here. And then you see a distinction between customizing this for still image shooting and for video shooting. And we'll see another separation in a moment. We go for still images in this illustration. And now it gives me another separation to distinguish between display image overlays for the monitor, which is the LCD here, and for the finder, which is the EVF, the electronic viewfinder. Let's go to monitor. And you see basically we have only a few options here activated at this point in time. But I could now say I want to have the full Monty and activate everything here. And now if we go back into live view, we have much more display overlays to toggle through. Let's count here. This is the original one where I started from with a lot of shooting information. And then let's go here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is monitor off, and then we are back in the original representation. And you find the monitor off actually here in the setting. If you look here, we have here monitor off. And by the way, here is essential. You saw me, maybe I activated this before. It's always essential to confirm. So you go here to the right hand side and say OK, and only then it's stored. Now let's check. Now we have exposure on, checked here under no display info. And that is the way you do this. So you can customize this to your convenience. I personally think that display all info is good for me. No display info, but just exposure is fine. I hardly work with histograms. I think I see whether the scene is correctly exposed in terms of light. So I deactivate this. I will keep the level. I don't want to have two informations here at the same time, since I do not work with the histogram. And I will also deactivate these here. And now remember, essential, go to the right hand side and confirm with OK. If you don't do it and go back and press the menu button or what have you, it will not take over these new settings and check boxes or uncheckings you just did. And now if we go back here and demonstrate this, this is all shooting information. This here is just exposure. And then here is the level gauge. And now I should come back with the next push to the all information image overlay. That's the way it works. The next setting I want to show you is about the image quality settings, and they are actually connected, directly linked to the storage settings. And that is super convenient. I think that is only in this form available in a menu system with Sony. And I personally like this a lot. So let me show you how this works. We are here in the shooting section here, image quality, and then we have image quality settings. And if I go into this menu, I have now here different settings. I have the file format, I have the raw file type, I have image quality for JPEGs and the resolution. And here I can directly jump to the linked section on recording media settings, which is very convenient. So let's quickly go through them and let's have a look into this. Here I can say raw and JPEG. This is the usual way I set this up. If I don't need the quick preview on my MacBook Pro via JPEG files, I go here for RAW only. And then you see here in the RAW quality settings, I recommend to go to lossless compression. And the option that you don't compress is no longer here. A bunch of cameras still have this, where you say no compression at all. But Sony has only lossless compression, compressed, high quality, and compressed. And I recommend to go to the best option here. And if you do that for RAW files with 66 megapixel, I believe the file size is already beyond 100 megabyte for one single image. So that will consume a lot of storage on your computer, whatever you're working with. So go for lossless compression here. Then we have JPEG quality. This is now no longer available because we have deactivated here JPEG. So let's go back. And I go here typically to extra fine for a quick preview. There is no harm since I have close to 2 terabytes. So I showed it in my intro video. Almost 1 terabyte in slot 1 and another almost 1 terabyte in slot 2. I don't care that much about space. My MacBook Pro has actually an SSD with 8 terabyte. So I can afford to go here for the always best settings. But of course, that depends on your hardware environment, what you do here. And then the JPEG image size here is also large, 66 megapixel. Now, you have here, and you see, there is a headline saying here slot 1 and slot 2. And the settings are the same, uniform, for both slots. And that's because in the recording media settings, I have set up the 2 storage slots for the Compact Flash Express Type A card for simultaneously storing all footage on both cards. And I think that's the best way to do it, because these Compact Flash Express Type A cards, they are super fast and it will not slow you down if you store the footage simultaneously on both cards. But what it gives you is peace of mind, because if one card would break down, which is highly unlikely given the quality Sony invests in these tough Compact Flash Express Type A cards, you have the footage also on the second card as spare footage and will not lose your shooting. Imagine being a wedding photographer and at the end of the wedding, your card breaks and you lose all the footage. What are they going to do? Repeating the wedding ceremony? I don't think so. And that's the way I set this up. That's why you see this all here, all these settings simultaneously under slot 1 and slot 2. And you see here, this is set up for simultaneous recording. You could also say certain footage should only end up on slot 1 or slot 2 or sort recording. I have this on simultaneous, and I have it for both still images and video footage. And I don't want auto switch media card here, but that is very convenient. So you can immediately here switch basically from the image quality settings to your recording media settings. So you also get control what's here in these columns. What I could do is I could quickly change it to show you the effect here in these two columns, slot 1 and slot 2. Let's say here we have slot 1, and then you see slot 2 is gone and you only see slot 1 here. If I go back here and say slot 2, you will see only slot 2 is here. And if I want to go back to the image quality settings, I just press that soft button here. And now you see it's all in these settings under slot 2. And if I go back here, just illustrating this and go back to simultaneous recording, this is all done. Here we go back under slot 1 and slot 2. And I personally find the link between these settings because they are so interconnected. This is ingeniously solved. Image quality settings, recording media settings, back to image quality settings. How cool is that? I really like that. That used to be the case for a while on Sony Alpha cameras, and I think that's an ingenious feature that they are linked, and you never forget that you can sort your footage on different slots, but you can also create a backup situation where nothing ever will get lost. Very nice. Now, let me make one more illustrative example how you can organize this. And let's go back to the example of a wedding photographer. And that person wants raw images to be in slot 1 and JPEG images to end up in slot 2, which is still a reasonable backup solution, because if one of the card breaks down, you will have either your RAW files preserved or your JPEG files preserved. Now, if it is JPEGs, bad luck, the quality will not be as information rich as you planned for, but nothing is lost at least, which is good, right? So you go here again into the Rec Media settings, and then you go here into the recording media for still images, and now you go to sort recording. And what will happen now is you will now see two columns where you can actually select what is stored in what slot. Let's choose it. Let's go back to image quality settings here, and you see now we have slot 1 and slot 2, and I can say slot 1 is RAW, slot 2 is JPEG. I can say here in slot 1 this is lossless compression, and I can say in JPEG quality in slot 2 this is extra fine, and the resolution I keep at 66 megapixel. And now again, very important, confirm this. Only if you confirm, it is how you set it up. And you see here now, slot number 1 is RAW files, slot number 2 is JPEGs, extra fine, 66 megapixel. Simple like that. Here it is again, and that's the way you set it up. It's not the way I want it, so I reverse it now again. I go here and say simultaneous recording. Then we go back into image quality settings. And we have here RAW plus JPEG. We have here lossless compression, extra fine, 66 megapixel. That's my setup. I like it. That's the way I want to keep it. And I hope this is helpful for you, because there is nothing worse than getting the storage settings wrong and having a shooting that counts. You never want to lose an opportunity when you had an opportunity to shoot, and then you lose your footage because of a hardware defect on a compact flash express type A card. By the way, you have here, and I use this particular example, which I outlined now in epic length, to show you another feature which is there. You always have tiny little help screens embedded in the menu system. And if you ever get lost and don't know what this all means here, you see here a question mark next to the trash bin. So that means if you push the trash bin button, you get here a little bit of a hint what this is all about. Sets the file format for still images. I think they wasted a lot of space. They could have added here a few sentences in the way I did here in my tutorial to give you more precise information, but at least you have something in your hand, and sometimes that's very useful. Let's go through the menu here. Let's go, for instance, to APS-C Shooting and press that button here, the trash bin, and then it says when shooting still images and movies, shoots in 35mm full frame or a similar recording range. So you always get this little help screen. If you need it, you can recall it. And sometimes it's not long, it's not extended, you don't really get what it means, but it is the first hint what this particular function is doing here. Let's do one more example. Let's go here to color space. That's a nice one. Let's go into color space. You see I have this set up to AdobeRGB. And if you press that button here, uses AdobeRGB, select this when the environment is compatible. File names begin, and that's essential information, by the way, with _DSC, which you find on your Compact Flash Express Type A card when you later look into these images. They all start with an _DSC. That's the way the help screen works. At least I wanted to mention and show you. Since in my little illustration about the help button here, we just stumbled into APS-C Shooting, I maybe should get this out of the way and quickly mention here. This is again a word of warning. Don't ever go here to auto. In my opinion, that's a big mistake. What auto means is if you mount a lens calculated for APS-C sensors, it will automatically crop your image. But that's not necessary. You can do this also later in post. So keep it, or at least do it consciously. If you know that an APS-C lens is mounted, then go to APS-C cropped sensor mode, which means the sensor will only use the inner part in the size of an APS-C sensor. Then switch it consciously on, but don't leave it to auto. And I personally always have this on off because I don't shoot at any time APS-C lenses only. And I never want to end up in a situation where by mistake, as an accident, all of a sudden all my footage is cropped down to APS-C size instead of using the full frame sensor dimensions of 36 × 24 millimeter. So my recommendation is, I don't think that a lot of people will shoot APS-C only lenses on a full frame camera. Switch it off, it's out of the way, nothing bad can happen, and you have peace of mind. The next tip is about aspect ratio. Let me quickly show you. This is again in the shooting section here. You see shooting section, then image quality, and then you have here aspect ratio. My recommendation is keep this at 3:2 at all times. You have a bunch of options here. You can go to 4:3 and imitate medium format. You can go to 16:9 if you're shooting for a YouTube video, for instance. You can go to a square representation. But these three here, they all crop into the sensor. And you will be able to recover this later anyway in the RAW file. So I recommend to keep this at 3:2 and then use the pre-programmed aspect ratios, for instance in Lightroom Classic. If you want to crop into the image, there is really no need to change this setting at any time. And by the way, even if you change it, the RAW file will always preserve the native aspect ratio of the full frame sensor, 36 × 24 millimeter, which is 3:2. For the sake of completeness, let's quickly talk about long exposure noise reduction. And you see I have this on here. You can also deactivate it. And it sounds very tempting to keep it switched on at all times. But where can it become very annoying? Well, first of all, if you believe that your post-processing AI noise reduction might be better than what Sony is doing in camera, and then you might basically smooth out some details if you have this activated, which you could better recover with third-party software. Or I personally don't believe that's the case. I think Sony is doing a good job. That's why I have it on. But think about an interval shooting where you shoot a sequence of, let's say, 300 images for a 10-second clip with 30 frames per second, and you have long exposures in that clip. And then whenever you have long exposure noise reduction on, it will actually take the double time before the next shot comes. Let's say you have a 30-second exposure, then the camera will record the scene in front of the camera 30 seconds long. Then it will show you that noise reduction is in progress and will take another 30 seconds. And only then you will be ready for your next shot. And for instance, for a time lapse of the night sky with stars, this is not useful. Then I typically switch it off and use the feature that I have the option to switch it off, which was not the case on many Leica cameras for a long time. And finally, Leica gave in to the many requests from users who do long exposures to get an option to switch it off. So use it whenever you take long exposures in a sequence of shots. Switch it off, use post-processing software to reduce the noise, and otherwise keep it on. By the way, for those of you who are not long enough in professional photography, or maybe not in professional photography at all. Why did I just say that it takes double as long, and why, if you shoot, like I just outlined, a 30-second exposure, it takes another 30 seconds for the camera if this is activated? Well, that's because what's internally going on is a so-called dark frame subtraction. So the camera shoots in the same length, so 30-second shutter speed, 30-second exposure time, the same frame again, but with the shutter closed, and in this way identifies if there are any hot pixels or any noise occurring in that. And by subtracting the two images, the one where the shutter was open and the one where the shutter was closed, the camera can, in camera, hex away the noise and the dead pixels. And that's what this function is doing. That's why whenever you have it on for, let's say, 10, 20, 30-second exposures or even longer, it will take the double time before you come in a sequence of shots, like if you shoot with intervalometer, to the next frame. Next, a couple of quick tips here. And the first one is high ISO noise reduction. I have this on normal. You can also switch it off. I do a lot of noise reduction via Lightroom Classic and the AI features embedded there. And I also use Topaz AI noise reduction, which is another software which I can use as a plugin into Lightroom Classic. So for me, I think it would be okay to switch this off. But my experience is that Sony cameras do this noise reduction very well and do not take away too many of the details you want to have in the scene. So I keep this on normal, but you can also go to a lower level of noise reduction here, or you can even switch it off if you trust more your third-party noise reduction software, which typically nowadays is based on artificial intelligence. Color space we covered. AdobeRGB is my choice here. It's just the bigger gamut which you get here. And then lens compensation is something I also want to mention. And if you take the camera out of box, distortion compensation is typically switched off. I made it a habit when I have a new Sony Alpha camera. I switch it on here. And you go to auto. And in the same way as on shading compensation, chromatic aberration compensation, the camera will figure out if there is anything not to your potential liking in the frame, and then try to compute it out of the frame. And that is very helpful. Of course, you can later always apply distortion compensation, what have you, in Lightroom Classic, but I find it convenient in that way. That's why I have all three options here, switch to auto and let it be processed in camera. The next setting I also want to mention for the sake of completeness, I want to only talk in this video here, to make it not overly long, about essential settings. There will very likely be a second video with more tips and tricks, which go even deeper in the very rich menu system of this very, very capable camera here. I've shot the camera now for quite some hours and I'm super excited about it. But this is only about essential settings. But here is one I want to show you. And I'm again in the shooting menu. And then on shutter, and you have here two settings: release without a lens, release without a card. And there is a very important distinction here. If you choose on release without a lens, disable, you will not be able with third-party lens adapters to shoot lenses which are not coming natively with the Sony E-mount. And I really want to do that. I, for instance, will try out very soon the version 2 Tech Art adapter to shoot with autofocus, which is amazing. And I have a bunch of videos about that on the channel already. Leica M lenses on my Sony a7R Mark VI. And if I would choose disable here, this would not work because Sony will not recognize in the camera that the lens is even mounted, and then I cannot shoot these type of mechanical workarounds where I can shoot Leica M lenses even with autofocus on this beautiful Sony camera. So I keep this enabled. What is deadly is if you say here in release without card, enable, because that means your camera will shoot, but nothing will ever be stored. And that is absolutely deadly. You should never do this. So this setting here, release without card, needs to be disabled immediately. One of the first things you do when you switch the camera on for the very first time, disable it. If you don't have cards in these slots here, you don't want to even touch the camera. So make sure you disable this. The next quick tip is SteadyShot. That's about in-body image stabilization. I showed in my introductory video about this new Sony camera that the specifications promise up to 8.5 stops of longer exposures handheld compared to the normal rule of thumbs, what, depending on the lens, of course, your shutter speed should be. And I have this on almost at all times, but I come to the exception in a moment. And you can switch it off here and you can switch it on. And I have this on whenever I'm on a handheld shooting. If I have the camera on tripod, I switch it off. And my personal experience tells me that it would not harm to keep it on even on tripod, but it's just against reasoning and against rules. And there are cameras actually, like Fuji GFX cameras, for instance, who really will not give you clean, sharp footage if you leave in-body image stabilization on a tripod. And since if you have a sturdy situation on a tripod, you don't need it, make it a habit at all times to switch it off if you shoot longer exposures on a tripod. It just doesn't make sense to keep it on. Make it a habit and then do it the same for all cameras you're shooting. Have it on if you do handheld shooting, switch it off if you have the camera on a tripod, because in-body image stabilization will not add anything meaningful to the situation you are currently in when shooting. And in this context, just a moment ago, we spoke about third-party adapters. I mentioned the version 2 TechArt adapter to shoot Leica M lenses. With this adapter with autofocus on the Sony a7R Mark VI camera body. And if you shoot lenses which are not natively from Sony, but you operate them with a lens adapter, you can still enjoy the 8.5 stops of in-body image stabilization. You just have to switch here under SteadyShot Adjustments to manual, and now you can feed in here the focal length. And if I would shoot, for instance, let's say a 24mm Summilux lens from Leica, I would choose exactly that. And then image stabilization will work, because the only essential information a camera needs to make in-body image stabilization, where the sensor is floating freely in a magnetic field, to work, is the camera needs to know what focal length you are shooting with. If the camera knows that, in-body image stabilization will be as reliable as if you would shoot with a native Sony lens with an E-mount. But if you don't do it, it will not work. And that's why it is essential and why Sony has this option here. You go here to manual and you dial in here your focal length, and then you're good to go. And you see this is very fine in terms of granularity. You can dial in here whatever you want. And in this way, for instance, a 28mm lens, you will have all the benefits of in-body image stabilization, even with third-party adapters, even with lenses which are not from Sony. But you have to make sure you're here on manual and not on auto, which I currently have because I have a native Sony E-mount lens currently mounted to the camera body. The next tip I want to show you is about exposure time. And this is very confusing for beginners or for people, might even be pro photographers who are not familiar with the Sony camera systems. And in order to show you, I switch here on the mode dial from aperture priority into fully manual mode. And you see this here. Here is the shooting mode, aperture priority. Now I'm going to fully manual mode. You see the camera symbol with an M. And I can use this dial here now to control my exposure time. And of course, in daylight, I would shoot at, I don't know, 1/320 seconds, 1/250. You see this information here in orange. But if I want to shoot longer exposures, watch what happens. I can go here now to, let's say, 2 seconds, then we go to 4 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. And then after 30 seconds, I get into bulb mode. And bulb means the shutter stays open as long as I keep holding and pushing the shutter release button, which is a very shaky mission to accomplish. And people might ask the very justified question, can I not shoot longer exposures than 30 seconds? And the answer is yes, you can. And let me show you how you do it. So let's make an example. Let's say we want to shoot a 60-second exposure, but our problem here is if we come from shorter shutter speeds, 15 seconds, and climb up to 30 seconds here, we all of a sudden, with the next push of that control wheel, end up into bulb. And of course, as I said, this is shaky. Pressing the shutter release button down, keep holding it for 60 seconds, and then releasing it, it will create shakes and vibrations. The image will very likely not be very good. So what can we do here? And we keep now here the bulb setting. You see we came from 30 seconds. We are now into bulb. And now we go into the menu. and we are here in exposure and color, then in exposure, and here you find the bulb timer settings, and that's the way to achieve exposures longer than 30 seconds without having tediously to keep pressing down the shutter release button. And what you do is you go here to bulb timer and you say on, and now you have the next menu where you can set your exposure time. You can set it to the 60 seconds we had in mind. You can also set it, if you want, to 160 seconds. You have almost no limitations here. And if we go back now here into live view, you all of a sudden see here we have bulb 60 seconds. So we have overcome the 30-second long exposure limitation we kind of stumbled into at first place. And what we also can do it now, of course, and we should do it, is combine it under drive mode with a self-timer. Let's say 5 seconds. And now you see we are set up for 5-second self-timer. The camera will leave the shutter open for 60 seconds and we are good to go. And that's the way to dial in exposures longer than 30 seconds. And I'm sure a lot of Sony Alpha beginners will stumble into that problem very, very soon if you are a night shooter and you have this out of box set to off. And then you have here, after 30 seconds, the next step is bulb. What can you do? What can you do to go to 100-second exposure? Well, you go to the menu, you switch this to on, you go here to this setting, and you go here to a 1 and here down to a 0. And then you have here, with a self-timer of 5 seconds, 100-second exposure. Simple like that. We are moving quickly in the video. As I said, this is about essential settings I recommend to look into before you do your very first shooting. And there is one more setting now under the wireless functions I want to show you. So you see this is here in the main section under network and then network option. And I have on here most of the time the airplane mode. And this is on. If it is off, let's go into live view. You don't find a little airplane symbol here. If you switch it on, you see a little airplane symbol here. You see this here, a little airplane. And why do I activate this? Because if I do not intend for the next hours to shoot remotely via the Sony apps you get for iPhone, iPad, tethered shooting, what have you, why should I waste energy and get battery consumed for a standby mode, which I don't need? So I switch this off and it really saves battery. I can confirm based on experience. So I recommend, if you don't go for a remote shooting at this point in time, switch it off, deactivate it, and if you want to go back into remote shooting, don't forget to activate it. Otherwise, you will be disappointed because you will not get the camera connected to a wireless device like an iPhone, what have you. Last but not least, in my collection of essential tips and tricks for getting familiar with the camera, let's talk about touch operation. And I've set this currently to off, but let's go here to on. And let's see what happens. If I have now the FN screen, I can also touch here to go into these settings. You see, now I can tweak my focus mode, can go here to AFC, for instance, and can conveniently operate this with my fingers. And you see, I'm not a really good touch person. If I deactivate it, this will not work. Let me show you. If I'm now on the FN button, I can tap wherever I want. I will need mechanical control elements to access this. For instance here, right? So this is the way it works. Touch not working. I can tap wherever I want. Now, for me, the most convenient way is always to switch this off because I'm not a touch person, but you might be a person who wants to have touch functionality when controlling the camera. So you want to be able to tap here. Now, if you have switched this on and you can not only use this, of course, to control your FN button, for instance, here in the FN menu. You can also use this then, for instance, to place the focus field. You can use it to start tracking from a certain position in the live frame on, and so on and so on. Then we have two distinctions here. We have the touch panel. That's basically when with your finger you place the focus field or you touch something on the LCD, and you have touchpad only, and that deactivates every touch on the LCD display. But if you have your eye on the electronic viewfinder, you have a certain section here where you can move your focus field, for instance. And that is more complex, more advanced stuff. As I said, I will show this in greater detail in a second batch of tips and tricks very soon, hopefully. but it's something you need to bear in mind. And if you use it, very likely for you, the best option is to go for both valid. And then you have a bunch of subsections which you can operate here and customize for your liking. For me, this is most of the time on off, because as you saw before, when I switched through different options with my finger, I just have fat fingers, kind of. I'm not a good touch person. But if you want to use touch operation, be aware that there are two ways to steer this. One is full frame on the LCD screen, and the second is if you have your eye on the electronic viewfinder, using part of the screen while looking through the EVF to steer, for instance, your focus field. And the way to do this is, for instance, let me just quickly illustratively show you. You see here, for instance, operation area, you see whole screen, right 1/2, right 1/4, upper right, lower right. You can fully customize that. As I said, I think this is a topic for a second batch of tips and tricks where I go even deeper into these cameras. As you might know from my video back then about the predecessor of this camera, the A7R Mark V, I know the Sony system very, very well. I have much more to say, but this video is already long enough, and I think I should stop here, because the most essential tips and tricks you have seen for setting up your camera for your very first shooting. If you like this video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.